Everyone has gotten the feeling that a place is either evil or dangerous. You can't always explain what is off about it, but some primal sense tells you that this place is somewhere you should not be. When I was a kid, I experienced such a place and got confirmation about the evil that went on there. When I was about 11 years of age, my mother told me that I had to go with her and some of her friends from church to pray over a house. I'm sure I was none too happy about being dragged to this and would have rather stayed home playing my PlayStation. The house itself was owned by a man from her church, and he asked them to come over and pray with him. His whole family had been negatively affected by whatever was there. As I remember, he had moved in there with his wife and daughter only about 6 months prior. Since moving in, he had witnessed shadows, cold spots, things moving out of place. Their little daughter also had seen things and was terrified of her own room. Worst of all, his wife's personality had changed and she became angry easily, verbally abusive, and was strangely attached to the house. There were red flags when they moved in for sure. For one, there were strange markings spray painted on the inside of the garage. The main one I remember seeing was the eye symbol. As we live in a state known for tornadoes, most people have a storm cellar. He had not opened his once since being there, as he got a really bad feeling about it. Now for my experience. We arrived at the house in the middle of the city, and the fact that it was in the city will be important later. I remember my mother and her friends walking around praying, and I just hung back bored, pretty creeped out at the same time. First thing I saw was the markings in the garage. Some of them were probably basic graffiti, but some, as I mentioned prior, were symbols and markings that gave me the creeps. When walking through the house, it did feel as though we were being watched. There was also that heavy oppressive feeling, one that I would recognize now as both despair and anger, if that makes sense. In short, there was something off about this house. And yes, there were random cold spots too. While they were inside praying, I went back outside and just messed with bugs and stuff. This was the 90s, so I didn't have a phone or anything to keep me occupied. Eventually, they all came out of the house and went to the storm cellar. The storm cellar had never been opened or messed with. They had decided they would all open it together. What I saw next terrified me and has remained ingrained in my memory ever since. When the door was lifted, a smell emanated from inside. It was the faint smell of decay. And at the bottom of the storm cellar were the flattened, decayed bodies of dead animals. There were a dozen or so decayed bodies of cats and chickens. Keep in mind, this was in the middle of the city, and there was no one with chickens nearby. They had obviously been dead for a year or so, if not more. Experiencing that evil feeling being confirmed with evidence of nefarious activities had changed my view of things at that age. Whoever had owned that house before that man was obviously into some very dark stuff, and it's not something I would like to experience again. I do not remember what happened with the man, whether he and his family moved or if their situation got better. I sure hope it did. I began my new job at Will Rogers Airport. I say new job, but I was really just moved to a different airline and working in the same ramp agent position. Now, I have to tell you that I had this crippling fear of heights, and my least favorite part of being a ramp agent is when I have to climb in the cargo bin on a rear loading plane. I mean, it's about 20 feet above the ground. Now, this particular night was a strange mix of a few factors creating an uneasy feeling. The first ambiance setting condition is it was raining. Not just light raining, but pouring, pissing rain, with a few scattered lightning flashes and even random power surges. Every now and then, we have dead bodies transported in the cargo bins. This was one of those occasions, and tonight was my lucky night. Apparently because my manager told me I was throwing this plane. Throwing meaning I was pulling the cargo out of the bin. It was the last plane for the night, and there wasn't very much cargo beside the body. My coworker John pulled the ramp loader to the plane and raised it up so I can walk up the conveyor belt to enter the bin. About 4 other coworkers come over with a baggage tug for the cargo. I say to everyone in a louder than normal tone because the rain was loudly smacking the metal shell of the airplane. "I hope you all are ready. I'm not trying to be in there all night." John laughed and said, "Don't worry about it. Maybe you can make a new friend in there," in reference to the body. I didn't think it was funny, but I just chuckled to him and told him to shut up and let's keep going. I climbed into the small, cramped space and sat in the bin, as far from this human-sized white cardboard box as I could, pulling out my phone out of my pocket and selecting a playlist to listen to while I throw at the bin. I find a good one and I start working. The conveyor belt moves at a snail's pace, and you have to wait until they scan each individual package, so I can't just throw them as fast as I want to get out of there. Now, about 10 minutes into it, I'm getting closer and closer to this box, and my music stops playing. I've had earbuds that short out when they get wet, so in the front of my mind, I automatically assume that rain has somehow got on, and I just needed to shake a little water out of them. But they were bone dry. I pull up my phone and I check Spotify to see if there is a glitch or possible problem with the app, and I see I have an unread text. Did I get a notification and forgot in the midst of my rap-fueled baggage handling? The way my phone is set up is when I get a message, it will tell you who it is from, but it will not display the message. You have to access them to read it. The message was from an unknown number, which was odd because very few people have my number to begin with. I clicked the notification to read the message, and all it said was "Hi." I sent a text back saying, "Hey, who is this?" My phone displayed that whoever sent the message saw mine immediately after it's sent. I waited. No response. I started my playlist back up and got back to my job. Shortly after a crash of thunder that was so loud the plane shook and made me jump at first, but I quickly rationalized it and returned to work. I noticed the conveyor belt was no longer moving. I yelled to John, "What the hell's going on out there? Why did it stop?" John replied, "Darn thing ran out of gas. We're going to take this load of cargo to drop off while we get another loader over here. Sit tight." I think to myself, where the hell else am I going to go? About 1 minute later, it got cold, like I could see my breath cold. I wrote it off as just a cold front and reach over for some stranger's luggage to lean on while I wait. As I look over for a bag to grab, lightning went across the sky, and I saw a quick flash of a little boy, 11, maybe 12 years old, sitting on the white box, staring at me with this eerily happy smile and his head turned slightly to the side. My heart sunk and I froze, never taking my eyes off that box for what felt like hours. I was startled by the replacement conveyor belt starting up right next to the plane. I darted to the moving conveyor, crawling as fast as I could, trying to keep my balance and panic at the same time. I hit the ground and looked at John and said, "Nope, I'm done. You're going to have to go in there." I didn't want to explain exactly what I saw, but John knew something scared me crapless. He even asked me, "What's wrong? Who was it?" I stuttered and walked away before I could say anything. Then I got a new text message notification, and then I heard it loud and clear this time, a response from the unknown sender saying, "It's your new friend." I want to start by stating, for the record, that I haven't always lived the best life. I've made a lot of dumb decisions that have led to me being in sketchy and dangerous situations such as this one, with starting regularity. However, it's also because of this that I'm always paranoid and prepared enough to face them. It's very rare that I run away from danger, and I always have some form of protection on me even when I leave the house. This is relevant later. Now on to the story. This happened back when I was roughly 19. My best friend at the time and I were practicing witches, and on this particular night, it was the beginning of a full moon. There were some thick wooded areas in the small cottage town we lived in that were well known as being the secret hangout spot for the college kids, in part because of a large secluded clearing at the end of a forked hiking trail, which was only accessible after crossing through a park and 2 wooden bridges. Imagine a wishbone shape with the clearing at the far ends. We thought this would be the perfect place to go set up shop and do some witchy rituals, as we'd been there plenty of times before and knew both sides of the trail decently, even in the dark. So we pack up our supplies in her milk crate and head to the park. After parking, we began the walk from the parking lot to the first bridge. On the way to it, you have to pass by an outdoor theater that's usually completely empty, other than the occasional group of college students not wanting to make the 30-minute walk out to the clearing. But this time, there was a man I'd never seen around town before. He appeared to be homeless due to his dirty and weathered clothes, with a bicycle leaning against a wall that had bags of junk hanging from it, and a basket on the back stuffed with more junk. He was sitting on the stage of the theater with his back to us and his face in his hands. A homeless man hanging out in the park may not sound odd, but this was a very small town, and homeless people were definitely noticed when there were ones. Since his back was to us, we figured we could slip away without him noticing us. So we did, and continued our hike out to the clearing. We got out there without issue and began setting up as the full moon was almost right overhead. We started on our work. I let her go first so I could double check the perimeter to make sure we're safe and alone before coming back to sit with her and watch, but still listening for any sounds of animals or lurkers. It was then that I heard rustling from the direction of the trail side we'd come from. I jumped up, flicked open my pocket knife, turned to face whatever had made the noise. From our spot in the clearing, it was about 10 feet from the dark trail ending, but the moon's light was just enough for me to catch a glimpse of something quickly ducking back into the surrounding brush. I quietly whispered to my friend what I'd just seen and to start packing the stuff up right now. She looked at me wide-eyed and did as I said while I kept my eyes trained on that spot. As she picked the crate up, we heard something else coming from the woods. It was quiet but gruff laughing. I shouted at the sound and they needed to F off, and that I was armed, but whoever was watching us just laughed louder. My friend started to panic and hiss to me that we needed to go, but the only other way out was the other side of the trail that we didn't know as well. The sound of more twigs snapping and rustling as whoever it was started to come out of their hiding place made up her mind. She took off towards the other side of the trail. As she did, I heard the tearing of more brush, like whoever it was trying to fight their way through the dense area to cut her off. Her safety being my biggest priority, I followed after her, but when I started running, the noise got quieter. Not gone, but like the person was taking their time getting through. We made it a quarter of the way down the trail, hearing the occasional twig snapping or brush rustling along the way, before I turned my phone's flashlight on so we could hopefully get down the trail faster without tripping. A few minutes after I did, there was suddenly stomping behind us, like somebody was booking it towards us. I spun around, ready to defend us, light still in hand, and that's when I finally got a good look at our pursuer. It was the homeless man, his face dirty and beaten up, but his eyes are what shook my bravery. It was clear he was on some kind of substance because his pupils were almost the size of his irises, and his rotted teeth were bared and clenched together so tightly it looked painful. He stopped dead in his tracks, ran back towards the clearing after the light hit him, which was my cue to do the same towards the park. We ran as fast as we could, and after that, only stopped for a breath when the bridge came into sight. We breathed a sigh of relief that the man didn't seem to have chased us the rest of the way, but as we crossed the bridge into the artificial light of the park, we looked back and saw his junk-packed bike, half covered by a tarp and dead brush thrown over it, as if to try to hide his presence to anybody else who would pass by. she ran ahead of me across the bridge and towards the car. But I continued to stare a little longer. I swear I saw his face peek out from the trail with a huge grin on it. That sent a shiver down my neck, and I raced after my friend. We dove into her car, and she whipped out of the lot. I looked back one last time and saw a dark silhouette just standing there on the bridge. We called the cops to report what we'd seen, leaving out why we were there, and they'd said they sent a car out to investigate, but we never heard anything back from them. And thankfully, we never saw that man again. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I love running. That is probably enough to tell you that I am a pretty strange person. I never really liked any team sports like soccer or basketball because I am severely introverted, but I needed to get to PE credits to graduate from high school. So I decided to join a cross-country and track team. While there was practice with the team almost daily, I would usually do my own independent practice on a bike trail that I lived really close to. I love that trail, and I spent a lot of my free time running, walking and biking on it, as well as wandering off the trail, exploring the beautiful forest that surrounds it. Despite this bike trail being 67 miles long, it was very well kept, or at least the part that I used was. The bike trail was a huge circle and was split into multiple sections that each had checkpoints at the end of them. The section that I used most of the time was roughly 8 miles from the checkpoint that I lived next to. I rarely ever walked or ran the full 16 miles, but I decided that I would attempt it for the first time. The run started off like any other run. I put my AirPods in and started to play my running music. It was a nice cool day, and the first 3 miles went amazingly smooth. Being that it was such a nice day for using the trail, there were quite a few other bikers and runners using it, but I really only saw them for the first few miles of the segment. This is because at about 4 miles into the segment, there was a 2-mile trail that went off the main trail and led to a popular campground. So that is where most of the runners and bikers that I saw came from, and they would usually be going toward the direction that I came from to get to the town that I lived in. I say all of this to explain why there was nobody else around when I made an unsettling discovery. Now, I was about 5.5 miles into the trail when something about 100 feet off the trail caught my eye. It didn't look like anything strange at first and was just a white object behind a tree. But as I got closer, I realized what it was, and what I saw was extremely unsettling. It was a dollhouse placed behind a tree, and on that tree there was a bunch of pictures of a little boy taped to it. All the pictures seemed to be taken in a daycare, and the child didn't appear to be having a particularly good or bad time at the daycare. What I mean is the pictures didn't seem concerning and were taken with the boy clearly aware that they were being taken. As for the dollhouse, it wasn't actually a dollhouse, but that is what I call it whenever I tell the story. It was something you'd see in an old woman's garden and was more of a large porcelain decoration than a child's dollhouse. It was very strange, and suddenly I felt as though I was being watched, and the feeling of dread that I have only felt a few times before this moment washed over me. I wrestled with the idea of taking a picture of it with my phone, but I was scared that if I really was being watched, whoever it was would not appreciate me doing so. I decided that my best thing I could do was to get a good look at this little boy in the picture and try my best to remember his face, so I could look up a list of missing people in the area and see if he was one of them. I walked back onto the trail, deciding that I would cut my run short and head back. The feeling of being watched continued until I got close to the offshoot trail that led to the campground, and the rest of the way back was fine for the most part. While it wasn't a paranormal or strange experience, it was certainly unsettling.